The next few days were the worst Matt had experienced since he had arrived in Yorkshire. Mr. Everall worked him harder than ever, and Noah never left his side. The hours passed in a tedious process of cleaning, painting, chopping, mending, carrying Matt was close to despair. He had tried to escape to London, and he had failed. He had gone looking for clues in the wood, but had found almost nothing. Two people had tried to help him. They and help him, and they had both died. Nobody else cared. A sort of fog had disagreed on his mind. He had given in. He would remain at Ivor until Mrs. Deverell had finished with him. Maybe she planned to keep him there all his life, and he would end up hollowed out and empty like Noah, a dribbling slave. Then one evening Matt thought it was Saturday. All days had become very much the same. Miss Deverell's sister, Claire, come to dinner. He hadn't seen the teacher since his encounter with her in Leicester Malling. Sitting next to her at the kitchen table, he found it hard to keep his eyes off her birthmark, the discoloration that covered most of her face. He was both drawn to it and repulsed at the same time. "Jane tells me that you have been missing school," she remarked in a strange, high-pitched voice. Haven't been to school because she wouldn't let me go," Matt replied. "I have to work here. And yet, when you were at school, you regularly missed class. You played truant, your preferred shoplifting and loafering on a motorway bridge. Smoking, that's what I heard. I never smoked," Matt growled. "Modern children have no real education." Jane Deverell remarked she was serving some sort of stew out of a pot. The meat was thick and fatty and come in a rich blood-coloured gravy. Roadkill in a primal swamp. You see them in the street, in their shapeless clothes, listening to what they call music. But what you or I would call a horrible noise. They have no respect, no intelligence, no taste, and they think the world belongs to them. Belongs to them. They soon find out. Claire Deverell muted. There was a knock at the door, and Noah appeared, dressed in what might have passed for a suit, except that it was about 50 years old, faded and shapeless. He wore a shirt buttoned to the neck, but no tie. He looked to Matt like an out-of-work funeral director. The car's ready," he announced. "We're still eating, Noah." Jane Deverell screwed. "What, for us outside?" "It's raining." Noah sniffed the food hopefully. "Then wait in the car. We'll be out soon." Matt waited until Noah had gone. "Are you going out?" he asked. "We might be." "Where?" when I was a young child, never asked questions of his elders, Claire Deverill said. Was that before or after the First World War? Matt asked. Pardon? Forget it. Matt fell silent and finished his meal. Jane Deverill stood up and went over to the kitchen. Went, stood up and went over to the kettle. I'm making you a cup of herbal tea. She explained. I want you to drink it all, Matthew. It as a resident quality seems to me that you've been rather on edge since the death of the poor detective. Are you going to arrange for him to phone me tomorrow? Tomorrow? Oh no, Mr. Morrow won't be coming back. She poured streaming streaming water. She poured streaming water into a squirt black teapot, stirred it, then poured out a cup for Matthew, and you get that down you. Get that down you. It'll help you relax. It'll help you relax. Maybe it was the way she spoke the words, or maybe it was the fact that Miss Deverill had never made tea like this before, but suddenly Matt was determined not to touch the liquid he had begun offered in. He cupped it in his hands and sniffed. It was green and smelled bitter. What's in it? He asked. Leaves. What sort of leaves? Dandelion full of vitamin A. Not for me, thanks, Matt said. He tried to sound casual. I've never been that crazy about dandelions. No, nonetheless, you will try it. You're not leaving the table until you do. Claire Deverill was watching him too carefully. Matt was certain. Now, if he drank the tea, the next thing he knew it would be the morning of the next day. All right, Matt lifted the cup if you insisted. I do. The question was how to get rid of it. Finally, it was Asmodeus who helped him out. The cat must have crept into the kitchen. While they were eating, it jumped up on the sideboard and caught a jug of milk. Sideboard and caught a jug of milk with its tail, causing it to trip, topple, and break. Both sisters turned causing it to topple and break. Both sisters turned around, their attention momentarily divided instantly. Matt reached down and upended his cup under the table. When the two women turned back again, he was cradling the cup in his hands as if nothing had happened. He just hoped they wouldn't notice the stream rising out of the damp carpet. He pretended to drink until the cup was empty, then sat it down on the table. Something stirred in Miss Jane's devil's eyes. And he knew she was pleased now to see if his therapy was right. He yawned and stretched his arms. Tried Matthew, she spoke the words too quickly. Yes, no need to help with dishes tonight. Day, why don't you go to bed? Yes, I'll do that. He stood up and went to the stairs, making his movements deliberately, slowly, and ever heavy. He didn't turn on the lights in his room. Instead, he lay down on the bed and closed his eyes, wondering what would happen next. He didn't have long to wait. The door opened and light spilled into the room. Is he asleep? Is he asleep? It was Claire Devil's voice. Of course, he slept 12 hours and woke up with a chainsaw of a headache. Are you ready? Yes. Then let's go. Matt heard the woman leave. He listened to their footsteps on the stairs. The front door opened and closed. The engine of the Land Rover started and the headlights swung around as it turned in the yard and then set off up the drive. Only when he was sure they weren't coming back, he did sit up on the bed. Everything had happened just as he had anticipated. He was alone at Arzal. Half an hour later, the lights come back on at Omega 1. Matt had been expecting that too. Dressed in black jeans and a dark shirt, he grabbed the bike and pedalled away from the farm. It was time to go back into the wood. It didn't take Matt long to find the entrance. The little flag he had made from his t-shirt was still there, tied around a branch. Gratefully for pine needles underfoot, he made his way along the corridor of trees, making sure he didn't stray off the tarmac strip that Tom Burgess had shown him. The last time he was here, the moon was behind the clouds, but he used the glow from the power station to guide him. When he looked back, the wood was pitch black. An owl cried out. There was a scully of leaves as some night creature battled its way up towards the sky. Matt heard the villagers before he saw them. There was the second of crackling and mumble of voices. They were very close. He pulled aside of a pair of low branches and realized that he was back at the fence that surrounded the power station. He knelt down and looked through the wire. An incredible sight met his eyes. The flat circle of land surrounding the power station was bursting with activity. A huge fire blazed outside the spire, throwing out vivid snakes, tongues of flames, thick black smoke curled into the air. 4 or 5 people were throwing handfuls of twigs and strawberry onto the fire. The damp wood hissing and snipping as it was consumed overhead. A line of arc lamps cast a brilliant glare over the field. It was a strange mixture of the building with its electric lights was modern, industrial. The bonfire with the shadow figures of people grouped around reminded him of a scene from primitive times. There was a car parked between the fire and the fence. Matt thought it might be a Saab or a Jaguar. A man got out, but he was silhouetted against the light and Matt couldn't make out who he was. The man raised a hand, and the gold seat ring he was wearing momentarily flashed red, reflecting the light of the fire. He, he had given a lorry that was parked on the other side of the clearing immediately began to reverse right up to the corridor that joined the giant spire of Omega 1 to the rest of the building. As Matt watched, the doors of the lorry were thrown open and several men emerged dressed in strange, cumbersome clothes. They congregated together, then lifted something, a large silver box about 5 meters long. It was observably heavy. They took a lot of time lowering it to the ground. Matt couldn't quite see what it was going on. He had to get closer. He followed the fence back to the gap he'd discovered the last time he was here and waited, making sure nobody was looking in the direction. But all the villagers were concentrating on the lorry. Matt chose his movements, then divided forward and head first. He felt the jagged edge of a wire tear his shirt and scrap his back, but he was lucky he hadn't drawn blood. He landed face down on the grass and lay still. A large bearded man walked across the clearing heading towards the lorry. It was the butcher from Leicester Malling. The ginger-haired chemistry was there too, and Matt also recognised Joanna Creve, the woman who had been at Greendale Farm when he returned with the police. She was talking to Jane Deverill. Matt looked back at the bonfire. The village children were standing around poking sticks into the flames, making the sparks leap up. There was 40 or 50 people at Omega 1. And suddenly Matt knew that he was spying on the entry village. Young or old, every one of them had made the journey into the forest. They were all in on it. All his instinct screamed at him to slip away before he was spotted, but at the same time he knew that what he was seeing was important. He just had to work out what those people were doing. They were why they were here and what was inside the silver box. The man had disappeared inside the villagers were queuing up about to follow them. The man with the sight ring began talking to Miss Devil. Matt was desperate to hear what they were saying. He crawled over the ground, keeping low, hardly darling, darling to raise his head. The closer he got, the greater the chance of his being seen. He hoped the long grass would provide some sort of cover. The light of the flame seemed to be reaching out to him, eager to show that he was there. He could even feel the warmth of the fire on his shoulders, and heard he had laughter. The man with the ring had cracked a joke. Matt wiggled further forward his head and caught something and pulled it away. Too late he saw the thin plastic wire that ran along the ground. Too late he realised that he should never have touched it. The stillness of the night was shattered by a siren. The villagers spun around, starting out over the field. 3 men ran forward, shotguns appearing in their hands. The children dropped their sticks into the fire and ran over to the lorry. The man with the sight ring slowly passed through the crowd, his eyes scanning the ground. Matt clutched the earth, burying his fence in the grass, but there was no use trying to hide. Miss Devil was standing beside the bonfire. She shouted a brief sentence in a strange language, and took something out of her pocket. She waved her hand over the flames. It was trailing a cloud of white powder which hung for a moment in the air before falling. The flames exploded, leaping almost as high as the power station itself brought red light flooding off the field. Something black began to take shape within them, modelling itself out of the shadows. In seconds of blackness and solid field, and now it sprung, seemingly in slow motion, out of the fire and onto the ground. Beyond it was some sort of animal, and moments later a second one appeared, bounding forward to join it. Behind them the bonfire shrank back its normal size. The well of the lamb stopped abruptly. There were dogs, but like no dogs Matt had ever seen. They were huge, 2 or 3 times bigger than Rottweilers and more savage to the flames of the fire that had given both to them. Still flickered in their black shark-like eyes. Their mouths hung open with teeth like 2 lines of chicken knives jutting out behind their lips. Their heads were high and uneven, their bulging skulls topped by 2 tiny ears. Horns. 2 tiny ears like horns. Slowly, one of them turned its ugly snout up to the sky and uttered a ghastly owl. As one day padded forward, the heads slating to one side, as if listening to the ground. Matt had no chance. He had to get away. If the dogs found him, they would tear him apart. No longer caring if he was seen or not, he stumbled to his feet and began to run. His legs were as heavy as lead, but desperately he forced them to carry him. The fence was still about 10 metres away, arms stretched. He raced towards it and not wanting to look behind. But Matt looked behind him, but he couldn't stop himself. He had to know where the dogs are, and there were they. With a grimace, he looked back over his shoulder and regretted it. The first of the creature had already halved the distance between itself and Matt, yet he didn't seem to be moving fast. It hovered into the air between each bound, barely touching the grass. Before jumping up again, there was something hideous about the way it ran. A panther or leopard closing in for the kill. As a certain mystery, but the dog was disformed, lopsided, ghastly, the flesh on one of its flanks and rotten, and a glasting rib cage jutted out, as if to avoid the stretch of a wound. The animal had turned away, its head hanging close to its front paws. Strings of saliva trailed from its mouth, and every time its feet hit the ground, its body quivered, threatening to collapse in on itself. Matt reached the fence and clawed at it with his hands, tracing his fingers against the wire. He thought he had run a straight line following the way he had come, but he seemed to have got it wrong. He couldn't find the gap. He looked behind him. 2 more bounds and the dog would reach him. There was no doubt that they would tear him apart. He could almost feel their teeth tearing into him, ripping the flesh away from his bones. He had never seen anything so furious, not even a zoo, not in a film, not anywhere in the real world. Where was the gap? In blind panic, he threw his whole weight against the fence, almost crying with relief as the edge buckled, relieving the jagged hole. Without hesitating, he divided forward. His head and shoulders went through, but his time hit the wire hooked into his trousers. Thrusting out with his arms, expecting to feel the jaw of the dog close on his legs at any moment, he struggled like a fist in a net out of the corridor of his eyes. He saw a huge black shape plummeting towards him. He gave a last frantic half. His jeans ripped and he fell through, rolling into a ball on the other side. Blood oozed out of a gash in his leg, but he was safe, at least for the moment. He struggled to his feet, then staggered back as one of the dogs lunged at the fence, its mouth forming, its teeth gazing at the wire. The two creatures were trapped. The hole had barely been big enough for Matt to pass through, and they were bigger and more awkwardly. But built then him, but then, even as he watched the dogs pawing at the earth, ranking the soft soil with their claws, they weren't going to allow the fence to stop. Then they were going to bury their way under it. Matt fled into the woods. Low-lying branches whipped into his body. Pine needles cascaded onto his hair and into his face. He blinked, trying to keep them out of his eyes. There was nowhere to hide, no way of knowing if he had taken the right path. He was trapped in a vast grid system where every direction looked exactly the same, but the dogs had the advantage. They didn't need to see him, they would smell him out. Matt didn't care where he was going. His only thought was to get away, to put as much space as he could between himself and the two dogs. How long did he have? 20 seconds, a minute or two at the most. Then they would emerge from the ground on the other side of the fence as it rising out of a grave. They would stalk him through the woods, outrun him, and rip him to shreds. He raced into the trunk of the tree and reeled away, spinning around. The lights from the power station were already a long way behind him. Barely invisible through the branches, Matt was exhausted, but he couldn't let himself rest. He needed to find a stretch of water or river or a stream. Maybe he couldn't throw the dogs off its scent, but there was no such thing in the artificial wood. It stretched on endless with not a glimpse of water in sight. He paused to catch his breath, his chest and throat rasping his head, pouring at that moment. A terrible baying broke through the air. It was a hollow of troops. The dog broke through the air. It was hollow trump. The dogs fought the fence. Matt almost gave up. He felt a silver of despair travel through his body. It was consuming. He would just stand there and wait for them to come. All he could do was hope his death would be quick. No, he forced. No, he forced himself to snap out of it. He wasn't dead. Wasn't dead yet, gathering up his last reserves of strength. He forced himself on desperately, twisting between the trees. Only the sudden stamping of his feet on hard concrete after the short silence of the pine needles told him that he was out of the wood. Incredibly, it had broken out onto a road, but it wasn't the road into Leicester Malling. It was wider, and there were white markings down the centre. For a moment, Matt felt relief. He was back in the modern world. A car might come. He looked left and right, nothing, and suddenly know that this was the worst place for him to be here. He was out in the open with no cover, nowhere to hide from the dogs. Where could we go? Where could he go? The strip of concrete divided two worlds behind him. Was the wood or ahead was some sort of moorland, wide and open. He remembered what he had begun thinking a river or a stream that crossed the road and plunged into the wild grass. He could tell at once that the ground was damp. All right, damp. He could feel it soft and sticky, under. I don't know. I've done it once. I don't know if it. Um, oh no, it's damp. He could feel it soft and stick under his feet. He ran out, and as he ran, he became aware that the ground was getting wetter. Cold wet water slid over his trainers and onto his feet. I said there should be a mod here. Give him a mod. I'll take that, remove that mod. I'll put it on again. I'll put that mod on again. He was only concerned of the danger when it was too late. He struggled to hurt, and at the same time, moment the ground gave away all through, and he thought if he found himself being sucked down, unable to move. A bog he had bulged right into it. Matt screamed. He was being pulled under incredible fast. He felt mud and slime raising on his knees and thighs when his wrist inflated about, but the effect only speeded things up. The bog Things up the bog gripped him around his stomach. Things up the bog gripped him around his stomach, and he could already imagine what was about to happen next during the last horrific moment of his life. The bog would raise over his fence, and he would give one last scream, but there would be no sound. He would be silent forever as slinking mud rushed to his mouth and down to his throat. Matt forced himself to stay calm. He knew that struggling would only make the end come faster. He almost smiled at him. At least he had treated the dogs. He had found the one place where they could never reach him, and if he had to die, perhaps it would be better to go this way. He relaxed in that instant. He thought he could smell something very close and yet distant. The smell of burning the fireplace. No, that was too far away. There would be someone else out there on the moor. His perhaps were raised only to be dissed again. There was no one there. The smell disappeared. It had been just his imagination. The bog bubbled around him and rose to his armpits. Its touch was cold, final stench of mud and rotting leaves. Reached his nostrils. Matt closed his eyes and waited for the end. But now the bog was toying with him, creeping upwards centuries by centimeters, loving, drawing him into his embrace. The beam of light hit him before he had heard the noise of the engine out of nowhere. A car had appeared. It had veered off the road, and now it was parked right on the edge. Veered off the road, and now it was parked right on the edge of a bog. A man got out, barely visible behind the glare of the headlamps. "Don't move," a voice commanded. "I've got a rope." But the bog, as if afraid it was going to lose its victim, tightened. It's all old gradually. It clung to Matt, its hands spreading over his shoulders, pushing him down. "Hurry!" Matt shouted. The mud was touching his chin. He forced his head up, desperately starting up at the pale moon that had at least come from behind the clouds. Only seconds remained. The bog pulver started to rise over his head, up his nose, into his eyes. Now only his hands remained above the surface, but when he was struck by the flying edge of the rope, something blinded. He groped and fought it and found it. He held his breath and tightened his grip, and then he was being hurled up towards the surface. His lungs were bristling with a cry. He opened his mouth and sucked in and breathed air. The man pulled on the rope, and he felt himself being dragged forward. His wrist cleared the edge of a bog with a loud sticking noise. He kicked out with his legs. His legs still clinging on the rope. A strong hand grabbed him and pulled him clear. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the firm ground. For a moment he lay there, reacting, getting the filth water out of his stream. Then he looked up and realised Richard Cole, the journalist from the Greater Malangitsa. "You had git. What the hell?" Richard was quickly surprised. "How? What are you doing?" The broken questions hung up. The broken questions hung in the air. Then Matt took control of the situation. Not now, he said. He was thinking about the dogs. They might have lost his scent when he was in the bog, but they would find it again. Soon enough. We have to go. All right. Can you get into the car, Richard? Richard leant down and helped Matt to his feet. Matt could feel the slime dripping off him. He wondered what he must look like. The car was standing near the side of the road with its engine running. Richard rested Matt against the bonnet, then went round to open the passenger door. There were piles of old newspapers and magazines on the front seat, and he began throwing them into the back to clear space. Matt was edging around to get in when he saw them. The dogs had emerged from the window. The dogs had emerged from the wood. They were in middle of the road, waiting. There, Matt whispered. What? Richard turned and saw them. The dogs were just 10 minutes away. Their tongue were hanging out. Their breath rose in white clouds. Their eyes flickered. Richard held up a hand. "Nice dogs. Stay he muttered. He reached into the car and pulled out a can. Get in, he said, Matt. What are you? What are? What are you? I'm going to put them down. Painfully, Matt eased himself into the front seat, his eye fixed on the waiting dogs. Water oozed out underneath him and dripped onto the carpet. Richard flummed in his pocket and produced an handkerchief, slowly facing him not to panic. He unscrewed the lid of the can and pushed the handkerchief into his neck. Matt smiled. Matt smelled petrol fumes. Richard found a lighter. The dogs crept forward suddenly, suspiciously, and Matt knew they were preparing themselves for the final leap. Richard flicked the lighter against the handkerchief and hurried the can towards them. The first dog had just left the ground when the can hit and exploded into the flame. Burning petrol sprayed over the second dog, instantly setting it alight. The fire roared round them with an unearthly bellow. The dogs fell back, one curling itself into a ball, curling, curling itself into a ball, the other snapping at its own hide in a vain attempt to divide the course of its agony. Fire had been there, fire had been there, creator now. Fire destroyed them. Richard slid over the bonnet and laid next to the driver's door. He got into the car, slammed the door, the gears into reverse and stamped on the accelerator. The back wheels spun, then founded a grip, rocketing the car back forward. Matt felt a thump as they drove over the body of one of the dying creatures. But where was the other? He looked around, then yelled out as, still blazing, it slammed into the windscreen, launching itself out of nowhere. For a few seconds, it was in front of them, its dreadful teeth centimetres from his face, when Richard changed into first gear and wrecked the wheel. The dog spun away. Matt looked out of the back windows. The flickering remains of one carcass lay in the middle of the road. The second had got snarled up in the wheels, but as the car sped forward, it fell free and was tossed to one side. They drove through the night for half a mile without speaking. The car was filled with the smell of the bog. Water was dripping out of Matt's clothes onto the seat and on. Was dripping out of Matt's clothes and onto the seat and onto the floor. Richard pulled a face and opened the window. So do you mind telling me what that was all about? He demanded. Matt didn't know where to begin. I think something is happening in Lays and Malling, he said. Richard nodded. I think you could be right. Richard Cole lived. Richard Cole lived in a very centre of York. He had rented a flat above a silver shop in one of the most city's famous medieval streets, a pretty cobbled passageway called the Shambles. The flat was arranged over 3 floors, a series of oddly shaped rooms piled on top of each other like children's building blocks. A kitchen and a living room took up the first floor, then above there was a bedroom and a shower and finally a narrow flight of steps twisted around to a spare room built into the roof. The place was in a shambles itself. All the furniture looked as if it had been rescued from a skip. As needed, much of it had there were old clothes everywhere, unwashed, plates piled high in the sink, CDs, books, magazines, and half-written articles shuffled together in a way that would sure make it impossible to find anything. The walls were covered with posters, mainly old American films. Richard's laptop was on the kitchen table next to a box of Weetabix, a half-eaten can of baked beans with the fork still sticking out, and 2 pieces of very cold toast. Matt had felt awkward as they climbed to the first floor, and it was worse now that he was in the flat itself. He was very aware then very well that he stank. Richard left him in the kitchen and back come back with a large towel. We can talk later, he said. Richard, now you need a shower and we'll have to get rid of those clothes. Have you got a washing machine? Are you kidding? The washing machine hasn't been built. That could handle that book. They can go in the bin and we'll buy you some more tomorrow. I'll find you some of mine to wear. In the meantime, Richard pointed upstairs. You'll find the shower easily enough. Are you hungry? Starving. Well, there's no food in the house. There's no food in the house. I'll go out and get something while you get changed. Half an hour later, the two of them were sitting in the living room, surrounded by Chinese food from the takeaway at the end of the street. Matt had spent 20 minutes in the shower, only coming out when he had washed away all traces of the bog. Was now wearing an old York University t-shirt with a towel wrapped around his wrist and nothing on his feet. Nothing on his feet. He hadn't been aware how hungry he was until he had begun eating. Now he was feeling stuffed. Nice place, he said, looking around. I was lucky to get it, Richard said it's very cheap. Not that I beer very much. I normally eat at the pub. Do you live on your own? That's it. I'm doing dress book tomorrow. Subscribe, hit the bell, share, like, thank you. Watch my other videos, thank you for coming.